The ropes bit into her wrists, searing through sun-baked skin. Above her, nailed crudely to the sturdy oak, a plank of wood bore blackened letters. Redskins Never Forgive. The words swam before her eyes, blurring with tears and the haze of the prairie heat. Days? It felt like an eternity since they had dragged her here, bound her, and left her to the mercy of the sky and the wolves. Her throat was a dry rasp, her tongue a swollen, useless thing in her mouth. Fear, a cold, constant presence, had long since dulled the edge of panic, settling into a deep, weary ache. The sun beat down, relentless. Buzzards circled, patient, high above. This was the end, she knew. Abandoned, a message etched in her suffering. A silent scream against the indifference of the land. Her name was Alara, though it felt like a name belonging to someone else, someone soft and alive in a world that no longer existed. Her father's farm, the rough, calloused hands that had held her, the laughter she barely remembered, ghosts. All gone in the dust and the fire. Now only the tree, the ropes, the sign, and the endless, empty horizon remained. A sound, distant at first, then growing, the rhythmic thud of hooves on dry earth. Terror, sharp and clean, pierced through the haze. Was it them? Come back to, what? Or something else? Her breath hitched, a small, broken sound. The horse was magnificent, a powerful bay, its rider a silhouette against the glare. He rode with a stillness that spoke not of leisure, but of vigilance honed by constant threat. Comanche, her blood ran cold. Everything she had ever heard, whispered in fearful tones around campfires, painted them as demons. Yet, as he drew closer, there was no war paint, no whooping charge. He stopped several yards away, dismounted with fluid grace, his dark eyes, unreadable, fixed upon her. He wore a simple deerskin tunic and leggings, his long hair braided with strips of hide. A rifle was slung across his back, a knife at his belt. He was lean, muscled, radiating a quiet, formidable power. He did not approach immediately, instead walking a slow circle around the tree, his gaze taking in the sign, the ropes, her face. Alara squeezed her eyes shut, bracing for whatever horror was to come. A choked sob escaped her lips. When she opened them again, he was standing directly before her, his face impassive. The sun caught the planes of his face, highlighting high cheekbones and a strong jaw. He reached up, not towards her but towards the sign. With a grunt, he ripped it from the tree, the nails screaming in protest. He tossed it aside as if it were refuse. Then his gaze met hers again. For a long moment he simply looked, his expression giving away nothing of his thoughts. There was no pity, no cruelty, just an assessment. He raised a hand, and she flinched violently. He stopped, his hand hovering. Then, slowly, deliberately, he reached for the ropes binding her wrists. The edge of his knife gleamed in the sun. He cut the ropes swiftly, efficiently. The sudden release sent a jolt of pain through her numb limbs. She crumpled forward, catching herself against the rough bark of the tree. She stayed there, trembling, watching him through a curtain of matted hair and tears. He didn't offer a hand, didn't speak. He simply watched her, waiting. The silence stretched, broken only by the whine of flies and her ragged breathing. Finally, she pushed herself away from the tree, stumbling. Her legs protested, unused to bearing weight. He turned and walked back to his horse. He mounted, then looked back at her, his eyes narrowed slightly. He made a small gesture with his head, a silent command. Go. But where? She had nowhere. He waited. The buzzards still circled. The vastness of the land felt like another threat. Hesitantly, fueled by a primal instinct to move, to survive, she took a step towards him. Then another. He nudged his horse forward, moving at a slow walk, expecting her to follow. She did, limping, stumbling, but following the silent, imposing figure of the Comanche warrior who had cut her free but offered no words of comfort or explanation. The sun began its slow descent, casting long shadows that stretched like grasping fingers across the prairie. The first day of travel was a blur of pain and fear. Alara's body screamed in protest with every step. The Comanche warrior, whose name she did not know and dared not ask, maintained a steady, measured pace on his horse. He never spoke, never looked back unless she fell too far behind. He didn't offer food or water until he stopped for the night. When he did, he built a small, smokeless fire, efficient movements honed by a lifetime outdoors. He offered her a piece of jerky, hard and dry, and indicated a small water skin. She ate and drank desperately, watching him from across the fire. He sat cross-legged, silent, his gaze scanning the surrounding darkness. She expected something. Violence, captivity, perhaps just abandonment further down the trail. But he did nothing but exist, a quiet, watchful presence. The second day was marginally easier. The initial shock had worn off, replaced by a dull ache and a gnawing uncertainty. Her fear of him was still a tight knot in her stomach, but it was tempered by the undeniable fact that he had saved her life. Why? The sign had said Redskins Never Forgive, yet he had cut her free. The cruelty that had left her bound seemed a simpler evil than the mystery of his actions. He was an enigma, cloaked in silence and the vastness of the land. During the day, she learned his patterns. He rode ahead, scouting, then waited for her to catch up. He knew where to find water, small springs hidden in the folds of the land. He moved with an inherent understanding of the world around them, a stark contrast to her own helplessness. She was a burden, she knew, slow, weak, useless, yet he did not abandon her. That night, a storm rolled in, sudden and fierce. The wind howled, whipping dust and rain into a frenzy. They took shelter under a rocky overhang. Alara huddled miserably, shivering, the thin fabric of her dress offering little protection. The warrior sat beside her, his back against the rock face, seemingly unaffected by the tempest. Without a word, he shrugged off a blanket made of animal hides and pushed it towards her. It was warm, soft, and carried the scent of smoke and something wild. She hesitated for a moment, then pulled it around her shoulders. It felt like a small act of grace in a world stripped bare of kindness. She looked at him through the driving rain. His eyes were closed, his face calm. He trusted her not to run, not to attack him in his sleep. The thought was astounding. She, the captive, the symbol of white cruelty, was trusted by the very man her people had taught her to fear most. Her own fear of him began to erode, replaced by a confusing mix of gratitude and a tentative sense of shared vulnerability against the elements. The storm raged, but under the overhang, wrapped in the warrior's blanket, Alara felt a flicker of something other than despair. It was not hope, not yet, but it was the absence of absolute dread. The silence between them was no longer empty, but filled with the roar of the storm and the quiet acknowledgement of their shared existence in this wild, indifferent place. She watched him, the rise and fall of his chest, the strength in his stillness. He was not the monster of her nightmares, but a man, complex and silent, who had chosen, for reasons she couldn't fathom, not to leave her to die. Days bled into weeks. The landscape changed, becoming more rugged, hills giving way to canyons and mesas. Alara grew stronger. Her muscles no longer ached with every step, and she learned to read the subtle signs of the land, the flight of birds, the smell of rain, the way the wind blew before a change in weather. She also learned to read the warrior. His name, she eventually learned through a series of hesitant gestures and his quiet utterance, was Tan. It meant mountain, suited him, silent, imposing, ancient. Their communication remained minimal, a language of gestures, shared glances, and the necessities of survival. He showed her how to find edible roots and berries, how to track small game, how to build a fire that left no trace. He taught her without teaching, simply doing and allowing her to observe and emulate. Her initial terror had long since vanished, replaced by a profound, if unspoken, respect. He never forced her to do anything, yet his presence was a constant, silent expectation. She was not his captive, not his servant. She was alongside him, a companion forged in shared hardship. The prejudice she had grown up with, the ingrained fear of Native Americans, crumbled away in the face of Tan's quiet integrity and competence. He was not cruel, he was simply different. His world was governed by different rules, ancient ones she was only just beginning to glimpse. One evening, as they sat by the fire, a small, desperate band of white settlers stumbled upon their camp. They were ragged, hungry, their eyes wide with fear and suspicion. They saw Alara, a white woman, sitting beside a Comanche, and their fear twisted into rage. "Abduction!" one man screamed, raising a rusty rifle. "He stole her! Kill the savage!" Alara's blood ran cold, but not from fear of Tan. She stood up quickly, stepping slightly in front of him. "No!" she cried, her voice surprisingly strong. "He saved me. He cut me down when others left me to die." The settlers faltered, confused by her defiance. But the man with the rifle was beyond reason. He aimed the weapon not at Tan, but at her. "You've gone native, girl. Traitor." Before he could fire, Tan moved. It wasn't a grand, cinematic lunge. It was a blur of controlled motion. He wasn't armed with a rifle like the settlers, but his knife was in his hand, its edge a wicked glint in the firelight. He intercepted the man, deflecting the rifle barrel with a swift, powerful blow from his forearm, the metal clattering against rock. The man cried out in pain and surprise. Tan didn't kill him. He disarmed him swiftly, then stood between the settlers and Alara, a silent, formidable barrier. The other settlers, seeing the effortless speed and contained power of the warrior, backed away, dragging their injured companion. They melted back into the darkness as quickly as they had appeared, their fear of the savage overwhelming their greed or misguided sense of rescue. Alara stood trembling, watching their retreating figures vanish. She turned back to Tan. He was putting away his knife, his face once again impassive. He didn't acknowledge the confrontation with words. He didn't need to. In that moment he had chosen her, protected her, not as property or burden, but as someone under his care. And she had chosen him, defending him against the ignorance and hatred of her own kind. The bond between them, forged in silence and survival, had been tested and solidified. The night was silent again, save for the crackling fire. Alara looked at Tan, really looked at him. She saw not a redskin, the hateful label from the sign, but a man of quiet strength, dignity, and unexpected compassion. The sign had said, "Redskins Never Forgive," but Tan had not only forgiven an unknown trespass represented by her presence bound to that tree. He had offered protection and the silent promise of a shared future, however uncertain. They continued their journey. The purpose remained unspoken, a silent understanding that they were traveling together, away from the places that had hurt them both. Alara walked with a new gait, her steps purposeful, her gaze meeting Tan's more often, a quiet acknowledgement passing between them. She had arrived at that tree stripped of everything: identity, hope, agency. She had been a symbol of hatred, an object of pity, then a burden. But the journey with Tan had not only rebuilt her physical strength, it had forged her spirit. She had learned resilience not from comfortable lessons, but from the unforgiving earth, from the silent example of a man who lived in harmony with it. She had shed the layers of fear and prejudice, seeing the world, and Tan, not through the eyes of her past, but with a clarity born of necessity and shared vulnerability. The sign, "Redskins Never Forgive," had spoken of an unending cycle of hatred and retribution. But Tan had embodied something different, the quiet capacity for action over words, for unexpected kindness in a brutal world, for seeing beyond the labels and the history of hurt. He had not forgiven the people who bound her, perhaps, but he had not allowed their cruelty to dictate his own actions towards the victim. In cutting her free, he had not only saved her life but offered her a chance to redefine herself, unbound from the expectations and prejudices of her past. Alara was no longer just the white girl who had been tied to a tree. She was a woman who had walked with a Comanche warrior, learned the language of the land, and found strength she never knew she possessed. She carried the scars, seen and unseen, but they were no longer symbols of her victimhood. They were marks of survival, badges of a resilience forged in the crucible of the prairie. Their path stretched out before them, uncertain but shared. The world remained harsh, filled with dangers both natural and human. But they faced it together, two figures moving in quiet tandem across the vastness. The trust between them was a fragile thing, built on shared silence, mutual respect, and the understanding that in this world, loyalty was earned not through grand declarations, but through simple, life-affirming acts, a shared blanket in a storm, a silent defense against hatred, a patient waiting on a dusty trail. Alara looked ahead, at Tana's back, strong and steady. The fear was gone. In its place was a quiet determination. She had been left to die, a message of unforgiving hatred. But she had been found, freed, and given the opportunity to live. And in that living, walking beside the silent warrior, she had found not just survival, but a profound and unexpected dignity, a testament to the quiet power of human connection in the face of overwhelming odds. The prairie wind whispered around them, carrying no words, only the vast, enduring truth of the land itself. They walked on, leaving the past behind, one deliberate step at a time.